Hello and welcome to Autology, the weekly podcast that brings you the latest on automotive technology. I'm Rebecca Bell-Chambers, and this week's episode is called Automation Drives Compute, a Chip Shortage Story. Here with me is today's guest, Phil Amserd, S&P Global Mobility Senior Principal Analyst and Lead for the newly launched Autonomy Domain Controller and SoC Forecast, and Jeremy Carson, S&P Global Mobility Research and Analysis Associate Director for Semiconductors and Components. Hello, and thank you for joining me on this week's episode of Autology.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. So we've got an exciting topic for you today, one that is responsible for as much change in your next car as just about anything else. But this particular topic has flown under the radar for most in the industry and for the vast majority of consumers as well. That is at least until last year when the semiconductor shortage began to wreak havoc on the industry. But this isn't just about the chip shortage. Today we're talking about bringing the power of a supercomputer into the car. There have been simple chips and control units in our cars for decades, and in some cars, these are already counted in the hundreds. These ECUs work just fine for the simple tasks that they were designed for, but consumers are demanding new experiences, both in how they interact with the vehicle and how the vehicle helps them to reach their destination. So firstly, Phil, can you connect these dots for us? How does the growth of high-performance computing relate to the chip shortage that is still plaguing the industry?
Well, people like to talk about a car being, the ultimate mobile device. It's basically like a smartphone on wheels. That's only partially correct. In reality, it's several smartphones that are operating both in some cases independently and in other cases collectively or cooperatively. So the ECU-based architecture that we're coming from, those were largely MCU-based, so microcontroller unit-based. Automotive has used those for literally decades. And they are really good at what they do, provided that they get to operate within a limited capacity that's primarily independent. And they can struggle a little bit when they have to do things collectively, largely because when you think of something like self-driving, if you're going to try to do that with the architecture that we're all accustomed to today, you would have to coordinate the activity between tens of controllers. And it's not that MCUs are incapable or ECUs are stupid. It's just, the level of coordination is just complicated that way. So the chip shortage last year really started as being MCU driven. And while autonomy applications were already moving towards SoCs, the MCU shortage in particular and the semiconductor shortage in general from last year really forced the industry to take a look at its supply chain and some of its fundamental decisions. And one of the things they realized was it was a lot of the mature process nodes that were used very much in automotive that were getting less and less investment in favor of the more advanced process nodes, the kind of process nodes associated with the SoCs that go into your phones and your tablets and your computers. So that started the OEMs and the tier ones to start looking more at how they were doing things. And it wasn't a casual, hey, wouldn't it be nice too? It became kind of a fundamental, we need to do things differently. We need to make sure that we're making decisions for our cars that are consistent not only with the way we've done things, but where are things going in the future. So they started looking at how do we start using more and more of these advanced process nodes so that we can leverage where the industry is going, where the investment's going, where the capacity is growing. And that was more towards SoCs than it was towards MCUs. Now, that's the good news. The challenge continues to be, from a semiconductor shortage standpoint, it's not like all you need is an SoC to make a car go. You still got to have all the components that go around it, power supplies and sensors and everything else to put a system together. And a lot of those are still on those mature process nodes. But the movement of MCUs to SoCs was kind of one of those unintended consequences of the shortage. And it also enabled more and more capabilities as we're starting to look at autonomy and more capable infotainment systems like cockpit domain controllers. They really can take advantage of those SoCs. So it's really that combination of, automotive is already starting to introduce some of that functionality that could use SoCs, and then the chip shortage really shined a light on the exposure they had to continuing to use MCUs. So once you start making the change from from MCUs to SoCs, then you also start forcing a change from domain controllers from ECUs to domain controllers. We won't spend a whole lot of time talking about that, but the bottom line to it is all these things are kind of converging to we're getting more and more centralization of features and functions and applications that likewise requires more processing capability. That additional processing capability is leading to the use of more powerful SoCs that can leverage the more advanced process nodes. And that's really where the semiconductor industry was going, kind of independent of automotive. And the shortage really forced automotive to align with that more so now than perhaps it had been a few years back.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the chip shortage has exposed this gap in growth. Will all the planned investment and right sizing of overall demand address it?
Well, our fingers are crossed. So that is definitely what we're all expecting. Now the industry could, the industry could have just spent, tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars for that matter, just expanding capacity. But that's not necessarily the most prudent thing to do financially. So what I guess the way I would put it is more electronics doesn't necessarily fix this in and of itself. Sorry. The challenge was the whole supply chain constraints that we were going through. So it wasn't just a matter of MCUs going to SoCs. It was a matter of semiconductor suppliers using foundries and fabs more and more. So there were just a number of things that were all kind of happening all coincidentally. So the bottom line to it is, the automakers were already looking at, trying to reduce the number of ECUs. The chip shortage really just gave them an opportunity to kind of put that in overdrive. It didn't change the direction they were going on. It really changed the slope of the curve that they were on, so that they were getting down to a more manageable number of ECUs, which again required a movement away from MCUs in favor of SoCs that were going from mature process nodes to advanced process nodes. And, I guess bottom line, if we didn't have the chip shortage, we still would have been moving in this direction. The chip shortage just kind of put everything in overdrive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to see the connection and the way that the industry is working to address the supply chain constraints. But it's clearly not just about managing the shortage, is it though? And for that, we turn to Jeremy. So, Jeremy, we heard Phil touch on the underlying trends that are driving the increase in computing power in the car. From your view in autonomy, what else is happening to bring this fundamental rethinking of the vehicle's central nervous system?
Yeah, so Phil really got it right. It's this shift that's been underway for years at this point. The shift from singular discrete driver assistance features, something like a standalone collision warning or automatic braking system, moving towards just more connected and more comprehensive functionality in the vehicle, what we would kind of describe as automated driving systems. It not only pulls all of those things together, but it builds them into something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And to do that, we still have all of the individual sensors kind of at the periphery to understand what's happening around the vehicle, how the vehicle is moving, how it has to navigate, these different dynamic actors on the road. But we really then need to bring it all together, make sense of it, and understand how to do it, and then execute, kind of send that signal to the vehicle about what it needs to do in a particular situation. And all of that just requires a whole lot more compute power, and as Phil mentioned, a lot more coordination amongst all of these different systems to make that even possible, much less make it efficient and kind of reasonable to deploy in greater numbers and kind of operate efficiently from a power perspective as well. And to kind of put that into context, we've got a lot of these automated driving systems coming up. They're basically, almost everywhere across the industry at this stage. Everything from Tesla's Autopilot to Super Cruise from General Motors. We've also recently this year had Mercedes gain its approval for its Level 3 Drive Pilot. But this all extends all the way up to Level 4 and Level 5 autonomous vehicles from the likes of Waymo or Cruise. But it all kind of comes back to what consumers are looking for. They're looking for this kind of new functionality to make their drive less stressful, more efficient in some cases, or just to automate it so that they don't have to supervise or be involved, and they can do something else with that long commute in traffic time as many of us head back to offices here.
Yeah, and that's going to be so critical as the whole world kind of, as you say, moves back to life before everything that's been going on. So what impact does this have on the supply chain? Are we seeing new players entering the space to take advantage of this disruption?
Yeah, we absolutely are. And if I can continue from the earlier thread about SoCs displacing MCUs, the supply chain is being disrupted right along with that. Because to a large extent, the SoC suppliers, aren't the traditional automotive MCU suppliers. So, if you think of who have been the traditional MCU suppliers into automotive, it's been companies like Infineon, NXP, Renesas, to name a few. And now you look at who the SoC suppliers are into ADAS applications. Specifically, it would be Mobileye, NVIDIA, Qualcomm, in the future, Horizon Robotics, Huawei, perhaps. And if you think of more advanced infotainment systems, you can throw Samsung into that mix, to name one. So we're not just seeing the content change, we're not just seeing the architecture change, we're seeing the suppliers change, and that's causing a few challenges, interesting challenges, to determine who's winning where. Because in the past you could kind of say, if I tracked what was happening with the traditional MCU suppliers, they were kind of scattered throughout the car. So if I knew who was winning, I could largely determine, hey, this is powertrain related, this is chassis related, this is maybe body related. But it's gotten messier now. So in addition to tracking the market trends as we've always done with our trackers, we see the need to dig into more details and provide a model level view even for the semiconductor content.
It sounds like a very fast-moving industry to be involved in right now. So can you explain a bit more how this is changing the work for you and your teams? I imagine such fundamental shifts, but not to mention the high value of these components in the car. It would produce some pretty significant changes to your outlook.
Yeah, and just to hit on your last point there first, the high value, for example, and quite honestly, I still have a hard time wrapping my head around this. When we talk about NCUs, traditionally, we're talking, let's say, in general terms, devices that cost between, say, $1 and $10. And now when we're talking about these SoCs, we're literally talking about a single component that costs between $100 and say $1,000. So the value associated with these components is an order of magnitude different, 2 orders of magnitude different than what it was. So what that's doing in terms of how we change our approach is, we're looking at the entirety of the supply chain, from the OEMs all the way on down. So the OEMs to the tier ones, to the SoC suppliers. Jeremy provides the model level detail, with this autonomy forecast, and then, we take that based on the sensor content associated with those models to determine what the autonomy domain controller level is, because one of the other things that's changing is, the OEMs are no longer building ECUs that are kind of single function hardware oriented based, and that have a target life expectancy in the design cycle of maybe 5 years before it's going to get redesigned because you're going to be buying a new car. Now they're trying to future-proof designs. So you want to build capability into the car, almost like using a tablet model. I'm going to build capability into the hardware, not even knowing what all the software and features that are going to be required over the life of that product. So it's no longer enough to say, oh, they launched that car as a level 2 and all the electronics on it are simply capable of level 2. It's like, no, they may be launching that as a level 2, but they've built the hardware capability into that to make it a level 3 or, even higher over its lifetime through OTA and other software updates. So that we've got to track the hardware, not just in terms of what the vehicle is capable of today, but what does the OEM want that vehicle to be capable of over the life of its car, or the lifetime of that you own that car. So that's affecting the way we approach this. It's affecting how the clients look at trends, both at the application and the SoC level. The initial release, might say that the autonomy forecast is going to be this, but then, we're trying to build in the insight that says that can evolve, at least the hardware portion of that won't be limiting the evolution of that system over its lifetime.
And how about for you, Jeremy? What's changing in the world of autonomy at S&P Global Mobility, and what does this do for your outlook?
Yeah, well, our team has been hard at work, and for that matter, so is Phil and the entire semiconductor team at S&P Global Mobility here. I mean, new products here coming to market to really address and capture what is changing to the outlook, but also, adding some new attributes, right? So we're tracking all of the meaningful changes and kind of the new differentiation in technology. The big one for us, I mean, in addition to kind of re-platforming our forecasts overall, we've done a lot of restructuring of the data. We can now see where features coexist, right? Because that collection of features, this automated driving system with these AEB and park assist features, that has an impact on what Phil and his team are looking at from a domain controller or an SoC or kind of a general compute perspective. So we're trying to capture all of that to show really coexistence of all of these features, but at the same time we're adding some new things, in particular level 2+, which has been kind of a topic and has been, defined in many different ways, I would say, depending on who you're talking to within the industry. But we see the space for level 2+ being carved out by a number of automakers here, in large part, in our view, because of liability. They want to expand the functionality. They want, kind of level 4 behavior, but in a level 2 liability framework. So that's really pushing kind of a new subset of features, but kind of avoiding jumping over that line to touch this new liability topic in level 3 and level 4, which we understand is going to be still a pretty big obstacle for a number of automakers. Some OEMs, of course, have just taken responsibility for it. They say, hey, if we're putting a vehicle on the road and it's going to operate in a level 3 or level 4 capacity, we'll take the liability for it. They have to. They're the ones responsible for its operation. But now we're going to be able to size up here later this fall with this level 2+ segment to really kind of capture what we see as probably the single biggest growth category, certainly in level terms, but even in kind of applications and functions within the forecast. So level 2+ and all of these kind of different scenarios that we track are going to be probably one of the biggest changes that we see. But as always with any kind of product update, we're tracking new resolutions for camera sensors, new technology subtypes for radar, for example, as we start to see the onset of imaging radar appearing in the data set. So we're just kind of preparing, a pipeline of all of these new attributes, so that we can continue to track and stay ahead of where the industry is going here, as this entire segment of technology continues to change very, very quickly. And as Phil mentioned, the entire concept of OTA and expanding that functionality over time, just adds another dimension to how we will need to help measure this in the future.
Okay, so given the new ADC SoC forecast and the upcoming refresh to the autonomy forecast, how will these inform the industry of the chip shortage potential that can be in the future?
Well, in addition to tracking, MCU and analog capacity, the industry will need to track SoC capacity, or maybe putting it another way. Right now, we've published automotive MCU and automotive analog lead times on ATI, really as a direct result of the chip shortage activity from last year. SoCs fall into the other category right now. What we'll need to do at some point, assuming the chip shortages linger for the foreseeable future, is perhaps pull out SoC capacity, SoC lead time separately, and look at those, because that will be another part of the equation that the industry will need to be able to balance what its expectations and requirements are. So one of the things that I'm particularly excited about with this new ADC SoC forecast for autonomy is we're including, I've mentioned earlier, the supply chain that goes from, the OEM tier 1 to the semiconductor supplier. But when you get to the semiconductor resolution, it will be the semiconductor supplier, be the SoC family, it will be the SoC model, and it will be the process node associated with that. So we can start looking at volume trends that would say, hey, there's going to be an uptick in demand for, say, 5 nanometers out in 2020X, maybe 3 nanometers for automotive in 2030X. And that's something that will be particularly important for the consumers of those products to use, but also the manufacturers of those products to use. Because, those are the things that have kind of caused the problem that we're in right now with the shortages And what we've said earlier, that all the investment, all the capacity expansions going into SoCs, there's also a lot more people using that kind of product. So it's not as if moving over to that's going to be a slam dunk. We're never going to have any shortages again. So the other part of it is the synergy that we're incorporating into this new forecast is, you've got the light vehicle production updates, which partially drives Jeremy's autonomy updates, which will partially drive the AUC SoC updates and the CDC SoC updates. So there's much more synergy within S&P Global Mobility. And that's going to be critical because, where we're going from where we are today of the evolution from ECUs to domain controllers aren't the end all of everything. Those will eventually be displaced by zonal controllers as these systems become more and more centralized. So what we're doing now, well, it's an exciting step. It's only the first step. And there'll be more of this stuff to happen in the future as these vehicle architectures continue to evolve and become more centralized.
Okay, great. Thank you. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. A big thank you to Phil and Jeremy for joining Autology and sharing your insights.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. And thank you to all of you listeners for tuning in as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode at our autology@ihsmarket.com email. And you can find out much more at autotechinsight.ihsmarket.com. Don't forget to hit all the subscribe, follow and like buttons to stay on track with the latest Autology podcasts. And we look forward to you joining us again in the next episode. Bye for now and have a great day.